Okay, so this is the uh, third time we'll be talking about, or actually the fourth time, but it's the third time I'm recording, talking about some connections between the writings of Martin Buber. You got yours, fantastic, and Zen Buddhism. And I want to state from the outset that when, some people might wonder if this is a class on Buddhism, what is that, why talk about a Jewish theologian like Martin Buber? And my response to that would be that when you're practicing the Dharma, you can find the Dharma anywhere and in anything. In fact, I was just at a church service for a funeral for a person in Ames. And there too, I was thinking the same thing. There's certain words, phrases, things that people do. You can find the Dharma wherever you look. And I think that's really important. This is not an exclusivist practice where we believe in Zen at the exclusion of other religious traditions. We can find truth anywhere if we look closely enough. And in particular, I think it's important to study we should study all of the religions, even if just a little bit. And I think that we can learn a lot from Judaism, and that we need to learn a lot from Judaism, partly because of as a counter to the deep roots of anti-Semitism that reside in this country and in all of our hearts, if we're really honest with ourselves. We all have we've said things, or maybe we've not said things that when we should have said things to counter or that don't counter the anti-Semitic narrative. So I think you have, in my absence, read. I'm not sure we have the same version, of page 57, where it begins, I contemplate a tree. I believe you guys started reading this last, is that right? Is that right, Heather? Yeah, you did, okay.
Yeah, I contemplate a tree.
Yeah, let's look at that again. We're gonna just read maybe the first page and a half here, and then we'll go into some of this writing of Katagiri Roshi, or the talks of Katagiri Roshi, because I think there's some pretty interesting corollaries there, connections. So I'll start us out here and then we'll just pass it around. Okay. I contemplate a tree. Now, as we go further, for those of you who are just listening to this now and haven't heard the other two recordings, you might want to go back to those other two, because it explains a little bit about Martin Buber's theology and these ideas of I, thou versus I, it. So if you don't understand what those are about, you may want to watch those first. But let's do this. He says, I can accept it. When I contemplate a tree, I can accept it as a picture. Let me pull this up on my screen here so we can all see. Let's see. Oh, wrong one. Let me try that again. It's hard to tell which is which. These are 22. Is it this one? All right, I think, yeah, here we go. I can accept it as a picture, a rigid pillar in a flood of light, or splashes of green, traversed by the gentleness of the blue-silver ground. All right, I can feel it as movement. I like to go through this kind of slow and just kind of get a sense of it, because if we're just using our brains to read words, we're not probably going to get much. But we need to slow down a little bit, enough to kind of take this in. I can feel it as movement, the flowing veins around the sturdy, striving core, the sucking of the roots, the breathing of the leaves, the infinite commerce with earth and air, and the growing itself in its darkness. That's already a really profound kind of understanding of a tree. It's very much a contemplative. You might, even looking out the window, if you have a window nearby, you check out the greenery around you, check out the trees, and see that. When you look at the tree, can you feel that? I can assign it to a species and observe it as an instance with an eye to its construction and its way of life. Now, as soon as he starts to say this, it's transitioning to a kind of an I-it relationship. I can assign it to a species and observe it. I give it a name. I categorize it, right? And if we think about this, like this is what we do with God as well. We want to put a name on something, on this something. I don't even, something isn't the right. As soon as we start using words to try to explain it, we're off the mark. But we do that with everything. It's not just with this, the otherworldly realm, but also this realm. Okay, Hogan, you want to read the next paragraph or so?
Sure. I can overcome its uniqueness and form so rigorously.
Okay, hold on just a sec.
That I recognize it only as an expression of the law, those laws according to which a constant opposition of forces is continually adjusted, or those laws according to which the elements mix and separate. I can dissolve it into a number, into a pure relation between numbers, and eternalize it. Throughout all of this, the tree remains my object and has its place and its time span, its kind and condition.
Okay, so now it's kind of moving into maybe more of a scientific understanding of thinking about trees, giving it, putting numbers around it, talking about the laws which it obeys, etc. All right. And Jocelyn, you want to read the next section? Yeah. Sure.
But it can also happen if will and grace are joined, that as I contemplate the tree, I am drawn into a relation, and the tree ceases to be an it. The power of exclusiveness has seized me.
Now, I think in this sense, first he's talking about relationship, right? There's this relationship between himself and the tree, as opposed to a thing to be used. And then the second thing, he uses this word exclusiveness, but I think he has the sense of he's meaning exclusiveness in a positive way. Usually and I think in our modern parlance, we see exclusiveness as a kind of in a negative light, maybe very conservative, religiously speaking light. But I think he is trying to communicate something deeper than that when he says, the power of exclusiveness has seized me. Okay, you want to continue, Justin?
Okay. This does not require me to forego any of the modes of contemplation. This does not require me to forego any of the modes of contemplation. There is nothing that I must not see in order to see, and there is no knowledge that I must forget. Rather is everything, picture and movement, species and instance, law and number included and inseparably fused.
I love it. So we don't necessarily need to forego, he says, any of these other ways of knowing the tree. All right. And let's see, Heather, you want to read the next section?
Whatever belongs to the tree is included. Its form and its mechanics, its colors and its chemistry, its conversation with the elements and its conversation with the stars. All this in its entirety. The tree is no impression, no play of my imagination, no aspect of a mood. It confronts me bodily and has to deal with me as I must deal with it, only differently. One should not try to dilute the meaning of the relation. Relation is reciprocity.
Reciprocity. Yeah, I just want to go back to that previous paragraph. It's just, there's a footnote there, but it says, the tree is no impression, no play of my imagination, no aspect of a mood. So cutting out the kind of sentimentality, he says, it confronts me bodily and has to deal with me as it has to deal with me. Right? It's just such a switch. We think that we got to deal with these trees, the falling of the leaves, or they're in the way of our transportation, or something else, or maybe a branch falls. But the trees have to deal with us as well. So it turns it around. There's a relationship taking place. And the footnote there, if you look under bodily, the footnote there, wish I could get this to go bigger, but it doesn't want to. Anyway, it says, liebt mir gegenüber. Lieb means body. Liebt is most unusual and means literally, it bodies across from me or vis-a-vis me. That's a very interesting way of thinking, isn't it? It bodies. Right? The tree bodies. That's fascinating. You know, we're just playing with language. And here's the thing, this is what Zen does. Zen plays a lot with language, because when we can start to kind of tear at our usual way of speaking, it changes also the way that we think about the world as well. And this is what this tearing at the language, bodily, or what it says here, it bodies, the tree bodies. Very interesting. Really when I read this, I really feel a sense of presence. Okay. So let's just, I'll just, Navab, why don't you take a look, or if you don't mind reading the last paragraph there. And we'll finish up this one section.
Okay. I'm muted.
You're good. You're good.
Okay, I am. Does the tree then have consciousness similar to our own? I have no experience of that, but thinking that you have brought this off in your own case, must you again?
I'll just finish it up here. Divide the indivisible. What I encounter is neither the soul of a tree nor a dyad, but the tree itself. That's the end of that section. Does the tree then have, I love the way you read that. Thank you for reading it so slow with the pauses there. Really helped me to take it in. Does the tree then have consciousness similar to our own? And basically he's saying this question is another way of dividing the tree up, to ask it. I have no experience of that, but thinking that you have brought this off in your own case, must you again divide the indivisible? Right? If we think about the tree as having a soul, there's a separation that we're creating. There's us, there's the tree. He says, what I encounter is neither the soul of a tree nor a dryad, but the tree itself. All right. Before we move on to like a little comparison here with Katagiri Roshi, let's I just want to open it up for any discussion that you might want to bring forward.
I thought it was interesting, you know, at the top of that final page that we kind of the switch between the two pages where he was kind of being like, well, I can categorize it and I can, you know, whatever. And then it was at the very top of that second page. It was something along the lines of like, but like all that I'm doing is like basically like pointing to a law that's the expression of everything that is, you know, that sort of, it really reminded me a lot of like sort of the Taoist texts that kind of, you know, very much influenced Zen. And just, yeah, that sort of like, I felt like he was talking about that like permeable thing that's in everything, and just like, oh yeah, I can make a law out of it, but it's just pointing to the way that that thing functions and flows around everything else.
Nice. Yeah, nicely said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that I'm reminded of what we read, I don't know, the second reading when he spoke of the eternal you. That's what I think of when I think of, you know, what I encounter is the tree itself, right? And also, as we were sitting today, the third and fourth parts of what you offered us to reflect upon, for some reason, I'm making a connection to that as well.
Yeah, abandoning myself to breathing out and letting breathing in naturally fill me. All that is left under the vast sky, an empty cushion.
Yeah. Empty cushion.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a look at Katagiri Roshi's writings here. Let me pull those up. And let's see here. Here we go. So now look at like the Zen way of expressing this. I think you will find some interesting parallels here, but I'll leave that to you to decide. Knowing the world before you measure it. Knowing the world before, I'll read the first paragraph. Knowing the world before you measure it. And this is from You Have to Say Something by Katagiri Roshi. These are based on talks that he gave. To practice deeply is to observe closely the emptiness of existence. I think this is something that Buber is pointing to as well. When we say, when Katagiri Roshi talks about the emptiness of existence, we have to remember that emptiness is not the sense that we might think of emptiness. It's total interdependence. Right? It's not that there's a me and there's a you. That's the place of the relative world where we divide us up. There's not me, there's not a me and a you. This is what emptiness is pointing to. Unfortunately, when we use the term observe, the idea of an observer comes up immediately, right? There's subject and object. And this is, again, this is what the Martin Buber is talking about too. I, thou versus I, it. I, it is a subject-object dual relationship. You, the subject, come along with the object you are observing. For example, right now I'm looking at the tape recorder that's recording my talk, but the tape recorder I observe is not the tape recorder as it is. It is the tape recorder being observed by me. We could say the same thing about a tree, right? The tree is not what we see. The tree is its own entity. Okay, Hogan, you want to read the next couple of paragraphs?
Any object you study is measured by your own yardstick. So any absolutes you observe are not really absolute. It is just stuff you have measured in relation to other things. To each thing you observe, you bring your knowledge, your education, your past, your customs, your heredity. This is why we can all look at the same things but see them in different ways. This is our usual human experience. But to approach the spiritual life like this is very dangerous. The point of the spiritual life is to realize truth, but you will never understand the spiritual life or realize truth if you measure by your own yardstick. Many religions tell us that if we are to embark upon the spiritual life, we must become like babies. This is not something we should take literally. What it means is that we must become egoless.
Yeah, this idea of becoming a baby, right? Something that's a Taoist idea, the ideal of the mind of the child, the beginner's mind we talk about in Zen. Jesus says if you want to enter heaven, right, you have to have the mind of a child. All right, Jocelyn, you want to read the next section there?
In his poem, Trusting the Heart-Mind, Song San, the third patriarch of Zen in China, tells us, the Great Way knows no difficulties, except that it refuses to hold preferences. To hold no preferences is to know the real meaning of absolute, which is the world as it is before you measure it. What you measure and understand by your yardstick can sometimes make you feel pretty secure. You might say, oh, I understand the absolute, but this is not real understanding. What you understand is not the real absolute. It is only some relative idea. Whatever you can measure by your yardstick is always very shaky.
Let me bring that up. Here we go. All right. Yeah, okay. And then Heather?
If you want to know the real absolute, you have to observe that everything is constantly moving and never stopping. Everything is constant change. This includes your eyes, your ears, your nose, and every pore of your body. Physically and mentally, all is constant motion. This is absolute. All things come together in a single event called this moment. Right now, this moment appears, but we don't know what will happen next. When you see something moving, there's only movement. You cannot measure this total movement. All you can do is observe it directly and participate in it completely. This is to truly know total movement as total movement.
Hmm. This is what this strikes me as is how much our judging mind gets in the way of seeing this. Right? We judge just till we're blue in the face, it seems sometimes, and it just prevents us from really entering fully into the moment. It's very hard to do too. We have to have some degree of compassion for ourselves, because what he's saying is basically when he's talking about having this is very hard for us to do, to actually accomplish that. So we when we're reading this, I would just encourage us to have a measure of self-compassion here too. To enter 100% into the present moment where you're not thinking about anything except for what you're doing, or you're so focused that you forget yourself, is not an easy thing to come by for most of us. And so we do need to have a measure of compassion for ourselves. We read this and we can know that that is possible, just to have trust that that is possible. Maybe we're not experiencing it at this particular moment, but it is certainly possible for us to deepen our concentration so that we forget the self. All right, Navab.
Actually, the idea of your participation is highly questionable. If you ask, how can I participate in total movement? The total movement you speak of is merely something measured by your yardstick. It is just an object relative to you, the subject.
How can I participate in total movement? Again, you've got an idea of what total movement is, as opposed to just 100% entering into it without thinking too much about it, without thinking about what you are experiencing. Right? He mentions your participation is highly questionable. If we're constantly looking back and thinking about our experience of the past, or of our immediate past even, we're not really in the present moment. We're just kind of trying to measure, and we're comparing our experience now with another experience in the past, with some ideas of what we think it's supposed to be. And we do that in Zazen too, especially when we're first starting. Am I doing it right? Instead of just letting go of the thoughts about what it's supposed to be, and just entering fully into this breath, right? Abandoning myself to breathing out. Think about that, abandoning myself to breathing out. All right, go ahead, Navab. Continue, please, if you don't mind.
Although trusting the heart-mind says that the great way, truth, reality, the absolute, knows no difficulties, but only refuses to make preferences. This doesn't mean we should wipe away our preferences in order to know the great way. You will never succeed in doing that. To refuse to make preferences simply means to know the world as it is before you measure it. For instance, we say we want peace and harmony, but what do peace and harmony mean, particularly in a world filled with terrifying new weapons? We can easily get lost in trying to figure out an answer to this problem. But real peace and harmony are very simple. Wherever you go, you can immediately practice them, because real peace and harmony are already in the world. Before you attempt I'm sorry, I'm getting excited. Before you attempt to measure them, they are there. So, oh, yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, you want to see if you can, you're welcome to articulate that excitement, Nawab, if you like.
Well, because you just talk about the judging mind, and when and then all of a sudden I was really clear when I was reading it. I didn't have it, and then it just excited me, like, oh yeah. It's hard. It's really difficult using words.
It is, yeah. Yeah. I love that last couple of sentences. Wherever you go, you can immediately practice them because real peace and harmony are already in the world. Before you attempt to measure them, they are there. That's a good reminder. I don't know, I lost my peace several times last week. I lost my peace several times, never mind last week, today. So I'm looking at this, and it's helpful. It's not that we don't measure. We need to measure ourselves against the Dharma. The problem is we measure ourselves against something else that's not Dharma. It's finite things. We measure ourselves against other finite things, and this, I think, Katakuri Roshi is asking us to measure ourselves against the infinite, as a way not to shame ourselves, but to know that we can, that our views are limited, that we're not seeing the full picture, and that's a healthy thing to not confuse our present views with reality. Maybe another way to say it. We do that. We confuse our present views with reality. And the point of practice, even just getting it, whether it happens spontaneously outside of a sangha or it happens within a formal practice setting like what we're doing this evening, it's a helpful reminder, right? It's a reminder for us. That's what practice is. It's a reminder for us to measure ourselves against the infinite, not against the finite. It's a reminder of ourselves that we don't have the full picture. I can think of an instant that just happened a few days ago with another person, and how that lots of measuring and judgments were taking place in those interactions, and they were not pleasant. I felt like I was confined to a little box. And that was in the midst of Dharma. That was in the midst of Dharma activity. So don't think that going to a temple is going to solve this. It could happen in a formal temple setting. It could also happen outside of the temple, where we wake up to this the limitedness of our perceptions. But this is an invitation for us just to take a moment to recognize our limited understanding. And then the byproduct of that is that we don't have to get so caught up in our small views. Sometimes, though, I should say, even knowing that, that's the Dharma, but knowing it doesn't necessarily change it right away. It could linger. These small views, it's like a whirlpool. You might know that there's a better place, or there's a better way to be in the world, but you're sucked into a whirlpool and you can't get out of it. So the Dharma, that's why the Dharma is often referred to as like a raft. It helps us to get across without drowning, get across the river, so to speak. All right, let's see. The great way refers to our true heart. Gosh, we're just about done here, but I think let's just. I want to again open it up for any closing remarks, discussions about what we're doing here.
I think that last the the addressing of like conditioning, I think, is just so interesting and something that I feel like I hear more about in Buddhist circles than I did other places, but I still feel like I just picked up a book I had read a while ago by a guy named Krishnamurti, if that name is familiar, called As One Is. And the whole book is about we can't even begin to ask the right questions until we realize that we are so conditioned that our conditioning is it's coloring everything. So to be as one is, one has to address that. So, and I feel like in Katagiri's writings, I was reading the same sentiment in different words, and it just really kind of connected with the importance of really addressing the the foundation that we're working with, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, and I see that with Martin Buber as well. I mean, he's really put. You can't read his stuff without thinking deeply about it a little bit more, and the language that's used here to make certain expressions makes you think.
Well, Buber is so poetic and beautiful. I mean, I know it's translated from German to English, but it's still, English being a somewhat Germanic language, it really, I don't know, I'm fascinating. I read it. I didn't know him before, and I'm really happy that you introduced that.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, like this term, it's translated as the tree confronts me bodily, but then there's a note where it says the tree bodies, right? The tree bodies. It's a very interesting way to think, right? We body. A body being a verb, right? It's a passive verb form. Changing the noun to a verb. Body is a noun, but to body. I body, you body, we body. It becomes a verb. It becomes an action, as opposed to a subject object. And we can have the same experience in, I hesitate to use the word experience, but Zazen, Dogen talks about dropping off body and mind. And when we sit Zazen long enough, and with that sincerity, with some devotion, we can experience this dropping off of body and mind, where the body is not just a thing, it's not a subject, it's not an object, it's a total combustion, it's total energy. It's that flame that we talked about in the guided meditation before. It's the flame, total, complete energy. And that takes us back to what Katagiri Roshi was saying.
Yeah, the movement is
Movement, exactly. Yeah, movement. There's a time when we sit Zazen, there's a time when you're sitting where we can just, it doesn't happen by force, it just happens where it's like the bottom drops out of a bucket. And we see ourselves as part of this whole. And it's not something you can put words to, though you might want to, you might be tempted to. This is really where poetry does come from. And of course, it's not limited to Zen Buddhism. I mean, Martin Buber is an example of that. I don't know what he's doing. There's not a form to it, or maybe it's the Jewish form. It's a Jewish way of doing it. There's a note on Buber. He said it says about him that he He was best known for his revival of Hasidism, a mystical movement that swept East European Jewry in the 18th and 19th centuries. So that, whatever that practice is of Hasidism, I'm sure we can find in there. I'm guessing that if we looked into that a little bit more deeply, we'd find some more connections with our Zen practice. Yeah.
It's Jewish mysticism, and it is very similar in a lot of ways. When I had first read Buber, it was in relation to comparative mysticism, and it's very similar. I used both I and thou and the Shobo Genzo in comparison, so I think there would be a lot of very good correlations there.
Wow, you've been holding out on us. All right. Great. All right, well, let's close it for this evening. We'll do a little chant here, dedication. May all beings be safe. May all beings be well. May all beings be happy, including you. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much. Thanks for your practice. We'll see you next time. Take care. Take good care.